When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and walked out of the house I had called home for 20 years. It wasn't anger that kept me quiet. It was sadness, quiet, heavy, unshakable. I felt like a stranger in a life I had built with love, a life that had slowly slipped through my fingers without me realizing it. I went to my small room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The walls were silent. My heart was louder than anything else. I kept thinking about my son, the boy I had raised with so much care, and how things had changed so quickly, without warning. I had tried to be patient, to give space, to understand. But one day that space turned into a wedge. And that day she said it. "Mom, I think it's better if you just go." I remember the way her voice shook, how her eyes avoided mine. I wanted to say something, anything, that could make her understand how much this hurt me. But I didn't. I only let the words sink in, like cold water. Later, when I sat alone, I noticed a small envelope on the table. It wasn't mine. It was addressed in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, neatly folded and pressed with care. I picked it up with trembling hands. Something inside told me that whatever was written there would change everything. I had no idea at that moment how much. I didn't know that those words, written in quiet ink, held secrets, regrets, and truths that no one had ever shared with me. I didn't know that they would make me see my son, my family, and even myself in a completely new light. That evening I sat by the window, rain tapping softly against the glass, and finally opened the letters. And when I read them, I realized that what I had lost wasn't what I thought. It was something much deeper. I want to tell you a little about my family, so you can understand why that day hurt so much. My son, Amir, was my pride and joy. From the moment he was born, I spent every hour thinking about him. I wanted him to be happy, to be kind, to grow into a man who treated people with respect. I didn't raise him with wealth or luxury. I raised him with love. Every meal I cooked, every late night I stayed up helping him with homework, every time I wiped away a tear, it was all for him. When Amir got older, he met Sarah. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and she had this way of making everyone around her feel calm. I remember the first time I met her. She smiled at me, and I felt an unexpected warmth. I thought, she could be the one who makes my son truly happy. And for a while she was. Our family dinners were full of laughter. We'd sit around the table talking about our day, sharing little stories, passing the dishes back and forth. I loved hearing Amir laugh the way he did when he was a child. The same laugh that always made my heart swell. I tried to love Sarah like a daughter, and I think she tried too. But life has a way of changing quietly. Over time, things shifted. Small things, really. Sarah would say things that sounded like complaints, but I tried to ignore them. "The house is too messy," she would say, or, "Could you not interfere with how I run things?" I nodded, smiled, and told myself I was only trying to help. Sometimes, I would retreat to my room, thinking that maybe I was being too much. But I couldn't stop caring. It wasn't in me to just step away. Amir, bless him, he tried to stay in the middle. He didn't want to hurt either of us. I could see it in his eyes. The quiet tension, the way he hesitated before speaking. And I knew he felt torn just like I did, but I didn't know that the quiet tension was only the beginning of what would come. Even so, I held on to hope. I told myself, this is just a phase. They'll come back together, they'll understand me. I kept helping with meals, keeping the house tidy, and making sure everything ran smoothly. I would ask Amir how his day was, and he'd smile. But sometimes the smile didn't reach his eyes. That's when I started noticing that something was very different. Something had changed between us. A space that I didn't understand and couldn't fill. Sarah was polite, yes, but the warmth I had felt from her before was fading. She would nod at me, smile faintly, and then go about her own life. I noticed how she would sometimes whisper to Amir in ways I couldn't hear, how she seemed to make decisions without including me, and I felt it. that invisible barrier forming between us. At first, I thought maybe it was just me imagining things. Perhaps I was too sensitive, but the small signs kept coming. The quiet sighs when I entered a room, the sudden silences at dinner, the way Amir would glance at her before speaking. Slowly, I realized that my presence was no longer entirely welcome. And yet, I tried to ignore it. I told myself, this is temporary. I'll be patient. I'll give them space. I cooked their favorite meals, smiled at Sarah even when she seemed distant, and hugged Amir every time I could. I didn't want to lose my family. Not to distance. Not to misunderstandings. I remember one Sunday afternoon in particular. The sun was warm, pouring through the kitchen windows. I was chopping vegetables for lunch when Sarah said softly, almost too casually, "Mom, do you think you could give us some time alone today?" I froze. My hands hovered over the cutting board. I wanted to ask, "What do you mean?" But I didn't. I simply nodded and said, "Of course." And I left the kitchen, feeling a lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow down. It wasn't about the time. It was about feeling that subtle shift, that realization that I was no longer fully part of their little world. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand what had changed, and I began to wonder if I ever truly understood them at all. After that day, I spent more time in my room, quietly observing the family from a distance. I noticed how Amir and Sarah laughed together, how they shared small moments that used to be ours too. And I realized maybe some things are inevitable. Families grow and change, and sometimes the people we love the most drift away without meaning to. But I also knew one thing for sure. I loved them deeply. And love, I decided, was worth holding on to. Even when it hurt. Even when it meant watching from the sidelines, hoping that one day, things would make sense again. Little did I know the real turning point was coming, a moment that would shake everything I thought I knew about my family, about Sarah, and about myself. That moment arrived quietly, as most life-changing things do, tucked inside a letter I hadn't expected to find. After that day when Sarah asked me to give them time alone, things slowly became more distant between us. It wasn't sudden. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations. Just quiet walls, invisible lines drawn where there used to be none. And those walls hurt more than any words could. I tried to maintain our routines. I would wake up early, make tea for Amir, tidy the house, and prepare breakfast. I'd set the table, sometimes leaving little notes for them. Small messages like, "Hope your day goes well." But I started noticing that the notes went unread. Plates were set differently, coffee cups left in unexpected places, chairs moved. Little things that spoke volumes about how much things had changed. One evening, I entered the living room carrying Amir's favorite blanket, the one I'd knitted for him when he was a boy. Sarah looked up from her book and gave me a polite smile. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly, but I could feel the hesitation behind her eyes, the way she didn't meet mine fully. Amir was on the sofa, scrolling on his phone, and he glanced at me briefly before looking away. That silence, that tiny pause, weighed heavier than anything else. I remember sitting down across from them and trying to start a conversation. "How was your day?" I asked Amir. "It was fine," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "And you, Sarah?" "I've been busy," she replied, eyes fixed on her book again. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I could feel the invisible distance stretching further, and I wondered if it was my fault. Had I done something wrong? Had I overstepped? I couldn't pinpoint a moment, a word, a mistake. But I could feel the coldness growing. Small misunderstandings started happening more often. I would offer advice on simple things, the laundry, the grocery list, small household chores, and Sarah would nod politely but later act as if I hadn't said anything. Sometimes she would make a decision without telling me, like buying new furniture or rearranging the kitchen. She never asked for my opinion, and it made me feel invisible. One day, I decided to help Amir with a project he had been working on. I found the documents on his desk and tried to sit down with him. "Do you want me to help?" I asked softly. He hesitated. "Mom, I can manage. But I thought you might like some help. Just for a bit." "No, really. It's okay," he said, forcing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. I realized then that Amir was trying to protect me. He didn't want to argue, didn't want to make things worse, and I understood that. But it also made me feel lonely, as if I were being pushed aside, even by the son I had raised with so much love. The tension built slowly, silently. Conversations became brief, polite, functional. The warmth that once filled our home had dulled. I started keeping to myself, walking softly around the house, careful not to intrude, careful not to say anything that might upset the fragile peace. One evening, while preparing dinner, Sarah came into the kitchen. I offered her a plate of freshly cut vegetables. She took them, thanked me, and said quietly, "Mom, maybe you should give us more space. We just need time." I paused, holding the knife in my hand. The words hit me like a gust of cold wind. Space, time. Those were not words I had expected to hear from someone I had treated like my own daughter. "I'm giving you space," I said softly. "I'll step back." She nodded, her expression unreadable, and left the kitchen. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading down the hallway. I felt a quiet ache, the kind that seeps into your chest and settles there. From then on, the distance grew more noticeable. They began having private conversations in rooms I couldn't enter. Doors closed softly but firmly in my face. I would catch fragments of their voices, laughter, whispers, tones that seemed to carry secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I didn't know if I was imagining it or if things had really changed so much, but my heart told me the truth. One rainy afternoon, I found Amir sitting on the balcony, staring at the gray sky. I joined him silently, hoping the silence wouldn't be awkward. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, I feel like things are complicated." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I don't know how to make everyone happy." My throat tightened. "You don't have to make everyone happy, Amir. Just be honest with yourself." He sighed. "I know. It's just, I hate seeing you sad." That moment, that quiet acknowledgement, hurt and comforted me at the same time. He cared. But he was trapped between two worlds, between his wife and his mother, both of whom he loved in very different ways. And I realized then that the tension wasn't just between me and Sarah. It was between all three of us, a triangle of love and expectations, slowly unraveling. Small incidents began escalating. A misplaced comment here, a misunderstood tone there. I would say something with the best intentions, like asking Sarah if she wanted extra soup, and she would respond sharply, almost defensively. Amir would step in, trying to smooth things over, but sometimes the damage was done, and I would retreat to my room, holding back tears, wondering where the warmth had gone. Then came the evening that truly changed everything. It was a quiet Saturday. I had baked bread and made a pot of stew, hoping to recreate a sense of home we had once shared. The table was set, candles lit, the aroma filling the room. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have one evening of warmth, one evening where laughter returned. Sarah walked in, glanced at the table, and said softly, almost without emotion, "Mom, we need to talk." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course." Amir looked between us nervously. I could see the tension etched on his face. "What's this about?" he asked quietly. Sarah took a deep breath. "I think it's better if you start spending more time out of the house. Just for a while." My heart sank, but I kept my voice calm. "I understand. I'll step back." Amir's eyes filled with worry, guilt, and pain. "Mom, please don't take this the wrong way." "I won't?" I whispered, forcing a smile I didn't feel. That night, I sat alone in my room, listening to the rain outside. The house was quiet, but it felt heavier than ever. I felt a mixture of sadness, confusion, and a strange sense of inevitability. Something was changing, and I didn't know if it could ever go back to the way it was. It was during that long, lonely night that I noticed a small envelope lying on the table. It wasn't there before? My hands trembled as I picked it up. Sarah's handwriting was neat and deliberate. Something told me that the contents of this envelope would shift everything. I didn't open it that night. I couldn't. I placed it carefully on my bedside table and lay down, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the family I had loved so dearly. I wondered if the love I had given was enough, or if, somehow, it had been misunderstood. Over the next few days, the tension only increased. I began noticing subtle signs that confirmed what I had feared. Sarah and Amir were making plans, speaking in private, and excluding me. The warmth I had known was gone. I tried not to interfere, tried to stay in the background, but every small interaction felt strained. One evening, I overheard a conversation in the living room. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words drifted to me anyway. Sarah said quietly, "It's not that I don't love her. I just need him to have his own life." Amir responded softly, I know, but she doesn't understand. She doesn't see how we're struggling." I sank into a chair, my hands clutching the fabric of my skirt. Their words weren't cruel, but they weren't comforting either. I realized then that this was not about anger or resentment. It was about change, about life moving forward, and me perhaps being left behind. That was the moment I decided I couldn't just drift silently anymore. I had to understand. I had to know why the warmth had disappeared, why the love I had poured into this family had become distant. And it was then, in that quiet, lonely contemplation, that I remembered the envelope, the one I had seen days before. Perhaps I thought the answers were inside. Perhaps this was the key to understanding the walls that had grown between us. I sat by the window that night, rain tapping softly against the glass, and stared at the envelope. I didn't know what I would find inside, but I knew, with a quiet certainty, that it would change everything. Little did I know it would change not just my understanding of Sarah and Amir, but my understanding of myself. The envelope sat on my bedside table for days. I kept staring at it, turning it over in my hands, afraid and curious at the same time. Each time I thought about opening it, I felt a rush of emotions: fear, hope, guilt, anticipation. What if it held words I wasn't ready to hear? What if it changed everything I had believed about my family? Finally, one quiet evening, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. The rain tapped softly against the window, a gentle rhythm that mirrored my own hesitant heartbeat. I sat at my small wooden table, took a deep breath, and carefully unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was familiar, Sarah's neat, precise letters, but the words were unexpected. The first lines made me pause. "Mom, I know this will be hard to read, but I need you to understand everything." I leaned closer. My hands trembled slightly as I read. The letter went on to explain things I had never imagined. Sarah wrote about her own struggles, her insecurities, and her fears. She explained that she had always respected me and loved me in her own quiet way, but she had been feeling overwhelmed, trapped between her desire to build a life with Amir and her need for independence. She wrote about moments I had never known mattered to her. The times when she had felt unheard, when she had been misunderstood, when she had quietly hoped I would see her efforts. And then came the part that shook me to my core. "Mom, I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted space because I was scared. Scared of losing Amir, scared of losing myself. I wrote this letter because I want you to know that I love you, even if I don't always show it the way you expect." I blinked back tears. I had been holding on to the wrong assumptions. I had imagined rejection, anger, and resentment, but here was the truth. It wasn't hate or dislike. It was fear, confusion, and love expressed in a way I hadn't recognized. The letter continued, revealing secrets and struggles I had never known. Sarah wrote about how she had worried that my love for Amir might make her feel invisible. She explained that she had felt guilt for asking for space, and she described small acts of kindness I had taken for granted. She even mentioned times when she had tried to show me appreciation in ways I hadn't noticed. As I read, I felt a mixture of relief and regret. Relief, because the love was still there, quiet and unspoken. Regret, because I hadn't realized sooner that her distance wasn't a rejection. It was a plea for understanding. And then I came across the final lines, the ones that changed everything. I am sorry for every tear I caused, Mom. I am sorry for every moment you felt left out. I hope one day we can sit together, laugh together, and feel like a family again. I love you, always. I folded the letter slowly, holding it to my chest. My eyes welled up with tears I had been holding back for months. For the first time in weeks, I felt warmth, hope, and clarity all at once. The walls that had grown between us began to crumble, not instantly but quietly, like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. I knew I had to act. I couldn't wait for another silent evening, wondering if they would ever let me back into their lives. I needed to show Sarah and Amir that I understood, that I loved them, and that I wanted to rebuild the warmth we had lost. The next morning, I went to the living room. Amir was reading quietly and Sarah was sipping tea. I took a deep breath and said softly, "Can we talk?" They both looked up, surprise flickering in their eyes. I continued, voice steady but gentle. "I read your letter, Sarah. I understand now. I understand your feelings. And I'm so sorry if I made you feel trapped or unheard. I love you, and I want us to find our way back to each other." Sarah's eyes glistened, and Amir's face softened. "Mom? I wasn't sure if you'd ever understand," Sarah whispered. "I do," I said simply. "And I want to try. We can start small, one step at a time." We spent the rest of the day talking, slowly peeling back the misunderstandings and quiet resentments that had built up over months. There were tears, but also laughter, soft, tentative, and healing. I realized that the distance between us had never been about love. It had been about fear, miscommunication, and unspoken expectations. That evening, we cooked together. Sarah chopped vegetables while I stirred the stew, and Amir set the table. The rhythm was awkward at first, but slowly, it became familiar again. We talked about little things, work, memories from the past, small plans for the weekend. It felt like the walls had fallen, and the warmth was returning, quietly but surely. Later, after Amir had gone to bed, Sarah stayed behind. She sat across from me, eyes gentle. "Mom, thank you for understanding. I know it wasn't easy." "It wasn't easy for me either," I admitted. "But I see now that love isn't about closeness all the time. Sometimes it's about giving space, understanding, and patience." She smiled softly, reaching out to take my hand. "I've been scared that you'd stop loving me. That's why I kept my distance." "I could never stop loving you," I said. "You're family, and family is forever, even when we make mistakes." It was a quiet, gentle moment, the kind that doesn't make headlines or stories, but changes lives. I realized that healing doesn't always come from grand gestures or dramatic apologies. Sometimes it comes from honesty, understanding, and the courage to face difficult truths. Over the next few days, our home slowly felt alive again. We laughed over meals, shared stories from our past, and even found humor in small mishaps. The invisible walls were gone, replaced by a delicate, growing connection. I began to see Sarah not just as Amir's wife, but as a woman with her own fears, dreams, and needs. Someone who loved us both deeply, even when she struggled to express it. I also began to see Amir differently. I realized how heavy it must have been for him, caught between the two people he loved most. His quiet patience, his gentle attempts to mediate, and his unwavering care for both of us had gone unnoticed for too long. That recognition deepened my love for him in ways I hadn't imagined. That turning point, the moment I read Sarah's letter, changed everything. It reminded me that love is not just about presence or actions. It's about empathy, understanding, and the willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. And sometimes it takes silence, distance, or even letters to reveal the truths we cannot see in everyday life. From that day forward, I promised myself to listen more, to observe more, and to assume the best in the people I love. I realized that resentment and distance grow in silence, while understanding and connection grow in openness and communication. And so the letters became our bridge. They reminded us of what truly mattered: love, patience, and the willingness to understand one another. After reading Sarah's letters and having that quiet, honest conversation with her and Amir, life in our home began to feel different, slowly, gently, like dawn breaking after a long night. The tension that had hung in the air for months didn't vanish immediately, but it softened. And in that softness, healing began. The first days were small, quiet gestures. I noticed Sarah leaving little notes for me, the kind I had once written for her. "Thank you for making my tea this morning, Mom." Or, "I really enjoyed the story you told Amir yesterday." These weren't grand declarations, but they spoke volumes. They were her way of bridging the gap that had grown between us. I treasured each one, keeping them tucked safely in my drawer, rereading them when the house felt quiet. Amir, too, began opening up more. He would sit with me after dinner talking about small things: work, memories from his childhood, dreams for the future. He smiled more freely now, and I could see the relief in his eyes. He no longer had to navigate a silent tension between his wife and his mother. That relief, I realized, was also my relief. The love we shared had never changed, but it had been buried under misunderstandings and unspoken fears. One afternoon, Sarah invited me into the kitchen while I was preparing lunch. "Mom," she said softly, "can I help you with this?" I smiled, handing her a knife to chop vegetables. "Of course," I said. We worked side by side, the rhythm quiet and comfortable. I noticed how natural it felt to be near her again, how easy it was to talk without fear or tension. She laughed at a small mistake I made with the vegetables, and I laughed too. The sound felt like sunlight spilling into a dark room. We began rebuilding traditions that had been forgotten. Family dinners became a time to share not just food but stories, jokes, and memories. We played small games in the evenings, sat together by the window watching the rain, or simply enjoyed quiet moments sipping tea. Each small act became a stitch in the fabric of our renewed connection. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when the old walls threatened to creep back. But instead of retreating, we faced them together. When I felt uncertain, I would speak honestly about my feelings. When Sarah or Amir felt overwhelmed, they would do the same. We learned that transparency and empathy were stronger than silence and avoidance. I also began to notice subtle changes in myself. I realized that, for months, I had been holding on to assumptions and fears that had magnified the distance between us. I had been so focused on trying to maintain control over our family dynamic that I had forgotten to step back and truly listen. Reading Sarah's letters reminded me of the importance of understanding and patience, and it helped me let go of guilt and judgment. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft shade of orange, we sat together in the living room. Amir was curled up on the sofa, reading a book, while Sarah and I chatted quietly about plans for the weekend. I glanced at them and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost brought me to tears. I realized how precious these moments were, how fragile and beautiful family love can be. I thought back to the months of tension, the silent dinners, the awkward exchanges, the feelings of exclusion, and I realized that those difficult times had been lessons in disguise. They taught me to listen more carefully, to observe without judgment, and to assume the best in the people I love. They reminded me that love isn't about being constantly close or agreeing on everything. Sometimes, love is about giving space, showing patience and trusting that connections will endure. Over time, we began creating new memories together. Weekend walks in the park, baking bread together, celebrating small milestones. Sarah even suggested a family photo, something I hadn't done in years. We laughed as we tried to pose, capturing moments of joy and closeness that felt genuine and earned. Each memory was a reminder that relationships can be repaired, that hearts can heal when we approach each other with honesty and compassion. I also found a quiet strength in forgiveness. I forgave Sarah for the moments of distance, even though there was no real wrongdoing, only fear and miscommunication. I forgave Amir for his quiet hesitations, understanding that he had been trying to protect both of us, and most importantly, I forgave myself for the moments when I felt powerless, when I thought I had failed as a mother. Forgiveness, I realized, was as much about nurturing my own heart as it was about healing others. One rainy afternoon, we sat by the window together, sipping tea. Sarah looked at me and said softly, "Mom, thank you for staying. Thank you for understanding me when I didn't even understand myself." I reached out and held her hand, warmth passing between us. "Thank you for letting me in," I replied. "We're learning together, and that's enough." And Amir, sitting nearby, smiled. "It feels like we're really a family again," he said quietly.
"Yes,"
I said, my voice calm and filled with emotion. "We are." In the weeks and months that followed, our home felt lighter, warmer, filled with laughter and quiet understanding. The letters remained a treasured reminder of that turning point, a symbol of vulnerability, courage, and love. Whenever I read them again, I felt gratitude, not just for Sarah's words, but for the opportunity to grow, to heal, and to embrace the full complexity of family life. I began to appreciate the small moments even more. The way Amir would glance at me with affection, the way Sarah would smile when we cooked together, the quiet evenings when we shared stories. Life was not perfect, and it never would be. There would still be misunderstandings, small disagreements, and moments of tension. But the foundation of love, patience, and empathy we had rebuilt made every challenge feel manageable. I realized that the distance we had experienced wasn't a failure. It was a chance for growth, for reflection, and for deeper understanding. It showed me that love isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for, in gentle, patient ways. And most importantly, I learned that family is not just about proximity or shared spaces. It's about presence in the heart, about listening, understanding, and showing care, even when it's quiet or difficult. That lesson, once learned, became the guiding principle for how we lived together from that moment onward. Looking back now, I see the months of tension not as a dark period, but as a necessary part of our story. They reminded me that relationships are living things. They grow, shift, and sometimes stumble. But with honesty, patience, and empathy, they can flourish again, even stronger than before. Sarah, Amir, and I began to plan small traditions for ourselves. A Sunday walk, cooking together, reading stories aloud. We celebrated birthdays and small victories, not with grand gestures, but with thoughtfulness and presence. And in those moments, I felt the quiet, profound joy of belonging, of being loved, and of loving in return. I also began sharing stories with them, memories from my past, moments with Amir as a child, stories of my own family. These stories weren't dramatic or extraordinary, but they connected us in ways that words alone could not. They reminded us of where we had come from and helped us appreciate where we were. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit quietly in my room and reread Sarah's letters. Each time, I felt a mix of nostalgia and gratitude. Those letters were more than words. They were a bridge, a lifeline, and a reminder of the power of honesty and vulnerability. They had opened the door to understanding, and through them, our family had found its way back to each other. In the end, the resolution wasn't about grand reconciliations or dramatic confessions. It was about small, consistent acts of love, patience, and empathy. It was about recognizing fears, embracing vulnerability, and choosing to stay connected, even when the path seemed uncertain. I realized that family love is not static. It ebbs and flows. It can be tested, stretched, and strained. But if we approach it with care, understanding, and quiet determination, it can endure. It can heal, grow, and become even stronger. And in that realization, I found peace. Now, when I look around our home, I see more than just walls and furniture. I see love, patience, and quiet resilience. I see the moments we almost lost and the moments we chose to hold on to. Every smile, every gentle word, every shared meal carries the memory of the distance we crossed together. The distance that taught us how much we truly mean to each other. I often think back to that rainy evening when I first opened Sarah's letters. At the time, I was filled with fear and uncertainty. I didn't know if what I would find would bring relief or heartbreak. But in that silence, I discovered something I had almost forgotten. Understanding has the power to heal, even when the wounds feel too deep to touch. Since then, life has not been perfect. We still have disagreements and moments when misunderstandings arise. But the difference now is that we speak openly, we listen carefully, and we trust each other. I've learned that love isn't about being flawless. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. It's about forgiveness, patience, and the quiet courage to reach out again and again. I watch Amir and Sarah sometimes, and I feel a deep sense of gratitude. They taught me that love can take many forms. It can be gentle, tentative, even hidden under fear. But it is always there, waiting to be recognized, nurtured, and returned. And in acknowledging that love, we've created a home that feels alive again, not just with activity, but with warmth, understanding, and connection. Sometimes, late at night, I sit by the window, listening to the rain or the soft hum of our neighborhood. I think about the journey we've been through, the tension, the distance, the letters, and finally the quiet reconciliation. And I smile softly because I realize that those moments, even the painful ones, were part of what brought us closer together. They reminded me that family is fragile, yes, but also resilient. That even when hearts feel distant, they can find their way back to each other if we have the courage to understand and forgive. I keep Sarah's letters in a special place now, not just as reminders of the past, but as a guide for the future. They are symbols of honesty, courage, and the healing power of words. Every time I read them, I am reminded of what matters most: empathy, patience, and love. As for me, I've learned to embrace both presence and space, to cherish the quiet moments, and to nurture the connections that truly matter. I've learned that being a mother, a wife, a daughter, or a friend isn't about perfection. It's about showing up with an open heart. And so, life goes on. We continue to laugh, to share meals, to celebrate small victories, and to comfort each other in quiet ways. The letters changed everything, not just by revealing hidden truths, but by reminding us all that love, when guided by understanding and patience, can endure even the longest periods of silence. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to this story to remember, it's this: hearts can heal, relationships can be mended, and love can grow stronger, even after misunderstandings, distance, and pain. All it takes is the courage to listen, and the willingness to forgive, and the patience to give one another time and space. And in that quiet, gentle understanding, we find the truest form of family, a bond that is not just felt, but lived every day in small acts of care, empathy, and enduring love. Because at the end of the day, love is always worth holding on to.